أعوذ بالله من الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين ونصلي ونسلم على عبد المصطفى الطهر الطاهر العلم الظاهر المنصور المؤيد أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين الذين أذهب عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد أما بعد Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It is a real sad day, and that is the 3rd of June, and it reminds us of the passing of one of the great masters, if I can say so, and he was indeed one of the great masters who walked this planet, and that was our beloved Hazrat Ayatollah al-Uzma Imam Khomeini Ridwanullah Ta'ala alayh. We remember the life of Imam Khomeini, and his life was a life of simplicity. He was not a man who made things difficult, and you need not to have had a very high IQ, a very high IQ to have understood Imam Khomeini. Very simplistic, very easy, although also he appealed to the very high intellectual. So if we have here a leader, which we had, and I can say so, a Rabbani leader, a leader, and in my own personal view, who was sent by Allah Azza wa Jalla Jalala. Yes, not as ma'asumeen as we know it, alayhimus salam, for our age. And we needed someone to have reminded us of certain very important principles. And if I can itemize, principle number 1, Imam Khomeini taught us through his teachings, through his life, through his practice, how to worship Allah Azza wa Jalla Jalala. That's number 1. He loved Allah, no doubt. He loved Allah. Everything he did was for the pleasure of Allah. And at the same time, you had, when he taught, when he showed us how to be in service and in servitude to Allah, he showed us in a practical way that if you fall in love with Allah Azza wa Jalla Jalala, then nothing else matter. Nothing else matter. And he was the embodiment of this hadith of alayhi salam, as it is found in Nahj al-Balagha, where Hazrat Amir alayhi salam says, عظم الخالق في أنفسهم فصغر ما دونه في أعينهم. That the Creator becomes so great in the conscience, in the hearts of the believers, that anything else become then non-existent, or rather not important. Everything else becomes small except Allah, who is and who is the greatest. Imam Khomeini taught us that worship should free you. Worship is not an enslavement of humanity. And he showed us practically. He showed us that when you worship, that in itself is an act of freedom. You submit yourself, you put your head on the ground, and you submit to no one other than the Creator. That's first. That's how we understand Imam Khomeini, that in his ibadah, in his worship, there was no compromise. And second, which is aligned to number one, and that is because he fell in love with Allah Azza wa Jalla Jalala. And next to this falling in love is Imam Khomeini, rahmatullah alayhi, had no fear. Like his great-grandfather, Imam Hussein alayhi salam. He showed us that though he is marja, though he is leader, he had no fear for anyone. And this is one of the remarkable attributes of Imam Khomeini in our age. He was fearless. Fear was not in his DNA. Fear wasn't. Why? Because of point number one. He fell in love with Allah. When you are in love, fear, which is a very low consciousness, is not part of falling in love. And hence, when you fall in love with Allah and next to it you had no fear, then what is important is you have no fear, meaning anyone in position of power and who abuse or suppress or oppress someone else, Imam Khomeini was against it. Why? Because this is what he was taught by Allah Azza wa Jalla Jalala and Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. So these are the steps. These are very important steps in my humble opinion. It was the the fearlessness of Imam Khomeini was cultivated where in his love, in his understanding of the teachings of Islam, more so his understanding of Allah. If Allah is with you, which he is, then Imam Khomeini showed, then there is no fear. He encouraged many people around the world. Imam Khomeini encouraged the world to be free, not to have an iota of fear in your heart. And this is what made Imam Khomeini, in the view of those in power, who made him, and he was perceived as a very dangerous man. And that in itself is an honor and an attribute for a real believer, for a real mu'min, for a real person who makes worship to Allah Azza wa Jalla Jalala, that you do not fear. And because of this, he spoke out against oppression everywhere. in his own country, which is Iran at the time. And then he spoke out against oppression everywhere. And Imam Khomeini aligned himself with who? With the oppressed peoples of the world. He saluted the liberation struggle against apartheid here in South Africa, and he identified the first thing when Imam Khomeini came to power, when he went back to Iran. I'd like to rephrase that. It's not when Imam Khomeini came to power, he had power. And that power was not in the paradigm of what we perceive as power. You win the hearts of people, and it doesn't matter who is in charge. You win the hearts of people, and that is power. But that power, it's not about power per se. It is what Allah established. And we'll come back to that word, what Allah established. Imam Khomeini identified him with a struggle everywhere against oppression, whether it was in South Africa. And the first thing he did was that during the time of the Shah, there was diplomatic relations between Iran, and that is prior to the revolution, and the South African government at the time, and that rather the apartheid government. And the first thing Imam Khomeini did was to sever, was to cut relations with the apartheid state or the apartheid regime of South Africa. And also in the same sentence, he also cut immediate ties with the Zionist state of Israel. And that for us is extremely important, because here you had, if we have a coin, we usually say the one coin is heads, the other coin is tails. So here you had a coin of apartheid, and the one side of the coin was South Africa, and the other side of the coin is Israel al-Ghasib, Kiyan al-Ghasib. So as Imam Khomeini so beautifully said, that it is a cancerous tumor, the Zionist state. And Imam Khomeini aligned himself with revolutionaries of the world, whether it was the Republic in Burkina Faso with Thomas Sankara, whether it was with Fidel Castro, whether it was with, the liberation struggle in Africa, and also the problems in Lebanon, for example, where the Zionist was actually involved. They were the cause for the problems in Lebanon. And Imam Khomeini, through his other son as well, Sayyid Musa as-Sadr, they started then the Muqawama al-Islamiyya. And one of the effects of the teachings of Imam Khomeini was what? And this is very important. The important point here is he gave us, or rather, he reminded us, or if I can say so in any case, he gave us self-worth, self-esteem. And this is a big pandemic, if I can say so. And that is when you allow someone to intimidate you, someone to control you against your will. And here the teachings of Imam Hussein came out beautifully profound through the enactment, through the experience, and through the actions of Imam Khomeini, rahmatullah alayh. There was a time when Muslims were subjugated, and because of the Islamic revolution, and this we would want to say is not an Iranian revolution. It was not confined to the borders of Iran. The Islamic revolution is a civilization. It is a consciousness of liberation. A consciousness of what? And this is what we said that we want to come back to establish what? The rule of Allah Azza wa Jalla Jalala. Many ulama, and may Allah be pleased and bless all of them, who try to establish Dawlatun Karima. And they, in our history, alhamdulillah, is full of it. Imam Khomeini was the only one who was actually successful. All those other ulama before have tried, and we can say so, they've added a brick to this building, which is Dawlatun Karima. And why do we say Dawlatun Karima? It is the establishment of the rule of Allah, not the rule of those who are in power, who oppress and suppress its people. That is unnatural. Oppression is unnatural, not what the West wanted through their suppression, or the East wanted through their suppression, and that is communism and socialism through the East. You had these two powers, and they were all oppressive in many ways. And I don't need to explain. There's no time now. But when we look at what's happening in Europe, how they have suppressed, and the terminology at the time was the third world, and now they call it the developing countries. Imam Khomeini taught us how to have no fear, coupled with, very important, self-worth, self-esteem. And this was the teachings of Imam Khomeini that was very liberatory. Why? You cannot have freedom. You cannot live in a situation where you want freedom, you are oppressed, and then in some way you accept. In some way or other you accept, and you live a life of subjugation. And this, when I see Imam Khomeini, I see Imam Hussein alayhi salam in our day, in our age, when he stood up valiantly, brave. He was not afraid. He tackled with the help of Allah, the qudrat of Allah. He was successful. And then he showed us how to be steadfast, never to negotiate, never to compromise on principles. Never. Imam Khomeini, when they established the Islamic Republic, and then we had the Iraqi imposed war, and then you had America, and you had the Soviet Union as well, you know, and you had sanctions against the Islamic Republic. Which country would have survived? Which country? Not one. Not one. Except Iran. And this is the self-worth, self-esteem. And he taught us how to be independent. Though Iran at the time was weak, but it was strong. And you know, one of the beautiful things of Imam Khomeini, he loved his people. He loved his people. No doubt that Imam Khomeini, and let me just be a bit personal here. I was, I think, 18 years old when we heard, we were here in Cape Town, that father, you know, that furthest place there, the last point of Africa, if we can say so. I cried when I heard the news on CNN. It was a day that I wished that would never have happened. So, let me end with a story of Imam Khomeini, just to show you. And unfortunately, I can't continue due to time, but I need to say this. In his house in Tehran, when Imam Khomeini was there, so one night, the security guards, etc., they were all obviously around the compound, and they have watched Imam Khomeini, and they saw Imam Khomeini went from the house. And usually the Iranian houses are there. You have the house, then you have the yard, and then outside of the yard you have your toilets, or at least one toilet, you know, which is outside. So they saw then Imam Khomeini, he stood up and he came out of the house and he went to the outside toilet. And okay, you know, then they watched him, etc. Imam Khomeini closed the door, obviously, and he did what he had to do there. But for some reason, the time was now running, and the security guard said that Imam Khomeini is now, he's now taking a bit too long in the toilet, unlike usual, you know. And it went on still, and here Imam Khomeini is not coming out of the toilet. Now, obviously, you know, in our fiqh even, it's one of the places where you don't stay too long. What about a marja, and what about the leader of the Islamic revolution and the leader of this Islamic consciousness? And yeah, Imam Khomeini is taking a bit, you know, he's taking a bit too long. So he said that he became worried a bit. And so with all due respect, he asked and, you know, asked Imam, and Imam, so Imam didn't answer actually, you know, yet. And at a point where he now saw, no, he now need to do something because Imam is now a bit too long in the toilet. And then when he became nervous and anxious and is a bit worried, and at the point when the door was open, he saw Imam Khomeini, the leader of the Islamic Republic, the marja, the wali al-faqih, was cleaning the toilet. I mean, there are many servants who would have done it. It's not an issue. And many would have done it in any case if the request was there. This is one of the attributes which is very profound, which stands out, as we've said in the beginning, simplistic life, simple life. He was really, you know, if we can say, an embodiment and he was an embodiment, a reenactment of the life of Hazrat Amir or any of those Imams alayhimus salam. This to me, of all the important and politics and role he played in the world, this to me shows me that he's a man like me. He's a man like, he identified with the needs like all of us. And he was a simple man. And how he lived was also simple, easy. He was not complicated. And with this, inshallah, I'd like to conclude then my small talk, and that is, he showed us how to worship Allah. He showed us not to fear. He showed us then to develop our own self-worth and to fight for what you want and not to allow anyone to oppress or to manipulate or to control you. And that is a life which we all want. That is natural. He showed us the naturality, if I can say so, if there's a word like that. He showed us how to live a life naturally. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل Muhammad. May the life of Imam Khomeini continue in our hearts, and how I wish, and many wished around the world, that we were at that janazah on a day like this. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.